Aaron Holt stared at the ruins of Outpost K92, feeling a heavy weight in his chest. The metal walls were scorched black, smoke curling up into the thin, cold sky. The outpost had been a small human settlement on the edge of the frontier, a place where hope and fear lived side by side. Now it was gone, destroyed after the political purge that had swept through the colony without warning. Aaron's unit had tried to defend it, but orders were twisted, communication lines cut, and before anyone could understand, the outpost was lost. He was blamed. Not the leaders who had vanished into hiding, not the bureaucrats who had sent them with inadequate weapons, not the saboteurs who had disabled the defenses, Aaron. The council called him a failure, a weak link, a scapegoat. Stripped of rank, supplies and transport, he had nothing left. Even the small shuttle that might have taken him back to the main human colonies was denied. They sent him to a dead volcanic moon at the edge of known space, a place where no human was meant to live. The shuttle's engines roared and trembled as it detached from the orbiting ruins of K92. Aaron looked out through the glass window, watching as the last light of the outpost disappeared into the black void. He felt hollow. Every memory of the colony, friends, hopes, even the little garden dome he had nurtured, seemed like it belonged to someone else. He clenched his fists and tried not to think. Survival was all that mattered now. The shuttle's automated systems guided him to the moon. When he arrived, the barren landscape stretched endlessly. Sharp obsidian rocks jutted from the ground like jagged teeth, and rivers of cooled lava carved strange patterns through the black terrain. The sky above was a dull red, tinged with ash from ancient eruptions. There was no water, no warmth, no life, or so it seemed. Aaron stepped out, feeling the chill bite through his suit. He carried only a small pack of essentials, barely enough for a week. The shuttle left without a word, leaving him alone. For the first few days, Aaron wandered. He checked caves, climbed jagged cliffs, and tested the air for pockets of gas or radiation. Every step reminded him that he was forgotten. Every night, he slept in the rocky shadows, listening to the strange groans of the wind, imagining the outpost and its people, and wishing for someone, anyone, to tell him it wasn't his fault. The moon was silent, but the silence felt alive, like it was watching him. On the fourth day he found it. A crevice hidden between two enormous obsidian slabs, almost invisible from a distance. He crouched and peered inside. The space widened into a small cavern, warmed by some deep heat beneath the surface. But what caught his attention was not the warmth, it was the shapes at the back of the cavern. They were eggs. Large, smooth, and pulsing with a faint glow, like they carried light inside. Aaron stepped closer, heart racing. He had seen eggs before, chicken eggs, reptile eggs, but these were different. They were enormous, larger than any human child, and strange patterns ran across their shells. They hummed softly, almost like a whisper, and he could feel something moving inside. He knelt before them, careful not to touch. Fear ran through him, but curiosity was stronger. "What are you?" he whispered. The eggs seemed to vibrate at his words as if acknowledging him. Aaron's breath caught in his throat. Could this be dragons? Legend said dragons once roamed space, creatures that had traveled between planets and stars. They were thought extinct for centuries. Yet here they were, hidden in a dead moon, waiting. Aaron felt something stir in him that he had not felt since he was a child. Wonder. The kind that made his chest tighten and his hands shake. He realized he could not leave them. He had been cast out, forgotten, and punished for crimes he did not commit. But these creatures were defenseless and they needed him. The first night in the cavern was long. Aaron built a small barrier with rocks to protect the eggs and lay beside them for warmth. The cold bit through his suit, but he ignored it, focusing on the faint glow and hum of the eggs. He whispered stories to them, telling them about the outpost, about humans, about hope. It felt strange, talking to something that might not even understand him, but he could not stop. The loneliness pressed against his mind, but he found comfort in the small life before him. Days passed. Aaron learned the rhythm of the cavern, discovering small heat vents that kept it from freezing completely. He melted snow for water and rationed the tiny food supply he had brought. Each time he checked on the eggs, they seemed more alive. Tiny cracks appeared in their shells, almost like smiles. Aaron laughed softly at the thought, a sound he had not made in weeks. The moon outside remained dead and silent, but inside the cavern there was life, and Aaron realized he had something to protect. On the seventh day, the wind outside turned violent. Ash and debris filled the air, and the ground trembled with distant eruptions. Aaron pressed himself against the eggs, shielding them as best he could. The hum from the eggs grew louder, almost a song, and for the first time, Aaron felt less alone. He whispered, "I'm here. I won't leave you." And though no one else could hear, the eggs pulsed brighter as if answering him. He knew then that his exile had a purpose he could not have imagined. The outpost, the council, the false accusations, they were all gone. What remained was a small group of beings that depended entirely on him. And Aaron Holt, the man cast out and forgotten, had something to fight for, something to protect. As the volcanic storms raged outside, Aaron lay beside the eggs, feeling the warmth of their life, and for the first time since his exile, hope returned. Somewhere deep in space, dragons stirred, and their legacy would continue, not because of force or power but because one human had chosen to care. The moon was dead, the world had forgotten him, but Aaron had found a new purpose. And that purpose was alive, glowing, and breathing just beneath the cold, black rocks. Aaron woke to another cold day on the volcanic moon. The wind howled outside, rattling the jagged rocks and sending ash swirling through the crimson sky. The small cavern he had found offered some shelter, but it was not enough to keep the bitter cold away. The heat systems, once part of the natural vents in the cavern, had begun to fail. Without them, the eggs would freeze and their fragile lives would be lost. Aaron shivered and pulled his suit tighter. He checked the eggs first. They were small, delicate shapes resting in their shallow nest, glowing faintly as they pulsed with life. He pressed a gloved hand gently against one. "Don't worry," he whispered. "I'll keep you warm. I won't leave you." He spent the next hours repairing the broken heat conduits that ran beneath the rocks. The original system was old and damaged, wires snapped and circuits corroded from years of volcanic fumes. Aaron had no proper tools, only a small kit he had salvaged from the shuttle and his own ingenuity. He rewired the circuits, patched holes in the insulation and rerouted the heat flow where necessary. When the system finally hummed to life, warm air slowly filled the cavern. Aaron felt a sense of accomplishment. The eggs stirred slightly as if they understood his effort. At night, when the temperature dropped dangerously low, Aaron did not rely on machines alone. He pressed his body close to the eggs, sharing his warmth with them. The cavern was silent except for the soft hum of the heat system and the faint pulsing of the eggs. Aaron talked to them as he had done from the beginning. He told them stories of the stars, of humans who had once been explorers, and of the outpost he had lost. He spoke softly not because the eggs could respond, but because speaking reminded him that he was alive, that he had a purpose. Days blended into nights and the storms outside became fiercer. Radiation bursts from solar winds hit the moon unpredictably. Aaron had to shield the nest each time, building temporary walls from rocks and metal scraps. The storms lashed against the cavern entrance, shaking the ground, but Aaron stayed firm. He wrapped the eggs in layers of thermal blankets he had sewn from his spare suit material. Each pulse of their glowing shells seemed to thank him. While working, Aaron discovered small crystals in the cavern walls. They absorbed heat during the day and released it at night. Cleverly, he positioned them near the nest, creating a slow-release warmth that helped regulate the temperature. He experimented with different arrangements, learning which rocks and crystals trapped heat best, which ones conducted it too quickly, and which could burn if too close. He spent hours crawling through narrow passages, testing, adjusting, and refining the system. The eggs thrived and slowly so did his spirit. Aaron began to notice other changes in the eggs. They pulsed brighter when he was near and dimmed when he stepped back. He had once thought it was his imagination, but over time he realized that the eggs were aware. Not fully awake yet but sensing. Responding. It was a strange comfort to him. He was no longer just a guardian, he was part of their life and they part of his. Sometimes, in the long frozen nights, he would lie beside them and imagine what it would be like when they hatched. He pictured small dragons with shining scales, wings folded tight against their tiny bodies. He imagined their first curious eyes opening and how they would recognize him as the one who saved them. Aaron smiled at the thought, a rare smile that made his chest feel lighter than it had in weeks. He did not allow himself to be distracted by loneliness for long. Every day he scavenged what he could from the shuttle and the rocks outside, finding small bits of metal, wiring, and even some frozen plant matter that could be used for insulation. He cleaned the cavern carefully, setting up paths so he could move quickly during storms. He built small barriers and channels to direct molten water from underground vents when needed. Every action was slow, careful, and deliberate. The eggs depended on him. One evening, the wind outside rose higher than ever before. A radiation storm slammed into the moon, and the ground trembled beneath Aaron's feet. He acted without thought, throwing himself over the nest, pressing his body and arms against the eggs. He shouted to them, telling them to stay alive, to keep glowing. The cavern shook violently. Rocks tumbled from the ceiling and a small fissure opened near the nest. Without hesitation, Aaron moved to block it, using a piece of metal from the shuttle debris. His suit scraped against the rocks, but he ignored the pain. The eggs were safe. For that moment he felt a strange connection with them, almost like they were holding him too. After the storm passed, Aaron lay exhausted on the cavern floor. The eggs were still glowing softly intact. Relief washed over him, and he realized that he had begun to feel joy again. Caring for them had filled a space in his heart that loneliness had hollowed out. He whispered to the eggs, "We made it. We survived." The light from the eggs seemed to brighten in response, like a quiet affirmation. Over time, Aaron developed a routine. He rose with the dim light of the moon, checked the temperature, fed himself and the small plants he had started growing near the warmer vents, and then checked on the eggs. He repaired, reinforced, and monitored. He whispered stories to them every night, sang songs softly in his own voice, and shared every emotion he could. The eggs pulsed in time with his heartbeat, and Aaron often felt their presence as a living rhythm around him. Weeks passed, and Aaron began to understand that the dragons he had thought extinct were not just alive, they were choosing him. They had awakened, slowly sensing his warmth, his care, his dedication. And in return he gave them something they had never known in the cold, empty universe: trust. Though he was cast out and forgotten by humanity, Aaron had found a new purpose. The moon was no longer just a place of exile, it was a home. The eggs were not just creatures to protect. They were companions, teachers, and reminders of what it meant to care. Each pulse, each glow, was a promise that life could survive even in the harshest places, and that even one human could make a difference. As Aaron lay beside the eggs that night, the wind howling outside and the cavern warm from the vents he had repaired, he felt a quiet determination. He would protect them whatever it took. He would stay no matter the storms or dangers. For the first time since leaving the outpost, he did not feel lost. He felt needed, alive. And the eggs, in their slow, quiet way, had given him that back. Aaron Holt, cast out and forgotten, had found a life worth guarding. And he would not fail. Aaron had begun to settle into the rhythm of life on the volcanic moon. The cavern had become a fragile sanctuary, warmed by the vents and the small systems he had repaired. The eggs pulsed softly, a steady glow that gave him comfort, and for the first time since exile, he felt like he belonged somewhere. But the quiet did not last. One afternoon, while repairing a damaged vent near the cavern's entrance, he noticed something unusual. The instruments he had salvaged from the shuttle flickered and beeped erratically. Energy readings spiked, far beyond anything the moon should produce naturally. Aaron frowned and checked the scanners again. The reading came from deep in orbit above the moon. A fleet. Small ships, moving fast, almost like they had come out of nowhere. Scavengers. Pirates. He knew their type. Humans or something like them, looking for profit, not caring what they destroyed. And he knew what they were after. The eggs. Panic rose in Aaron's chest, but he forced it down. Fear would not save them. He ran to the cavern, scanning the walls for anything he could use as defense. Rocks and metal scraps, some old wiring, even pieces of the shuttle hull. Nothing was a real weapon. But he had to try. The ships descended, kicking up ash and dust. Their engines glowed against the red sky like stars fallen too close to the ground. Aaron could see small drones detach from the main fleet, hovering over the cavern. He shouted at them, though he knew they could not hear him, and then started his preparations. He dug small trenches and placed jagged rocks at the entrance, creating a trap to slow them down. He rigged a few makeshift electric charges from the shuttle's batteries and wires, hoping they would at least startle the drones. He pressed thermal blankets against the eggs, wrapping them as tightly as possible. Then he waited, hiding behind a large rock, heart pounding, listening to the hiss of approaching energy weapons. The first drone appeared. Small, agile, and armed with a cutting laser. It hovered above the cavern floor, scanning. Aaron lunged at the controls of his makeshift trap and triggered the electric charges. Sparks flew and the drone screeched before falling to the ground. His hands shook, but he had bought time. More drones came and Aaron moved quickly, using his small knowledge of the cavern to his advantage. He led them into narrow passages, where their size worked against them. He threw rocks, pulled levers, and used every broken tool he had as a weapon. He was alone and each movement carried risk, but he could not allow them near the eggs. One drone managed to slip past his defenses and hovered directly above the nest. Aaron's stomach dropped. He grabbed a long metal rod from the debris and thrust it upward, hitting the drone. Sparks flew and it crashed into the rocks, shattering. He fell to the floor, coughing from the smoke, and looked at the eggs. They were unharmed, their glow steady. Relief washed over him. Then he saw the main ships. Large, black, heavily armed vessels, hovering just above the moon's surface. They had weapons designed to tear through rocks and soil. They did not care about life, they only cared about profit. Aaron knew he could not fight them directly. He had no real weapons, no reinforcements. Only cunning and desperation. He studied the cavern and the surrounding landscape. Lava flows, unstable rocks, hidden vents. An idea formed. If he could trigger a controlled collapse, he might drive the scavengers off, or at least delay them long enough for the eggs to survive. It was risky and he might not survive, but the eggs were more important than his life. He set charges along the ceiling and near the rock walls, using the last of the shuttle batteries and wiring. He worked fast, knowing that every second counted. Sparks flew as he connected the final wires, and then he pressed himself against a rock, holding his breath. The cavern trembled as the first small explosion went off, sending dust and debris into the air. The drones panicked, their sensors confused by the shifting rocks and sudden heat bursts. One by one they were destroyed or driven back, unable to navigate the collapsing tunnels. The larger ships hovered above, but their sensors could not penetrate the thick smoke and falling rocks. Aaron pressed forward, throwing more rocks, hitting weak points in the drones, and using every ounce of energy he had. Finally, silence returned, except for the distant hum of the surviving ships retreating. Aaron sank to the floor, covered in dust and sweat. The cavern was damaged, rocks had fallen, but the eggs were safe. They pulsed more brightly than ever, almost as if they were aware of what had happened. He pressed his hands against them, tears running down his face. "You're safe," he whispered. "I promise I'll protect you. No one will take you from me." The event changed something in Aaron. He realized that the eggs were not just fragile creatures. They were alive in ways he could not yet understand. They sensed danger, responded to care, and perhaps even trusted him. And he, in turn, had found strength he did not know he possessed. Alone, exhausted, and with nothing but broken tools, he had stood against a fleet of scavengers and won. Over the next days he repaired the cavern as best as he could. He reinforced walls, cleared debris, and checked the eggs constantly. Their pulsing glow seemed steadier now, and Aaron spoke to them constantly, telling them what had happened, soothing them after the terror of the attack. He even began to talk about the future, about what it would be like when they hatched, imagining wings and scales, warmth and life. And in the quiet moments, when the wind howled outside and the cavern glowed softly with the light of the eggs, Aaron understood something. He was no longer a man cast out and forgotten. He was a guardian, a protector. The eggs were not just creatures to defend, they were a reason to live, a purpose that gave him strength beyond fear. Somewhere far above, the scavenger fleet retreated, shaken by the unexpected resistance. They would return perhaps, but Aaron felt ready. He had discovered that courage was not the absence of fear, it was the willingness to face it. And he would face it again and again for the eggs, for the life they carried, for the warmth that had returned to his own heart. Aaron Holt, once forgotten by humanity, had become something new. Alone on a dead volcanic moon, he had found a life worth defending, and nothing, not ships, not lasers, not storms, would take it from him. Aaron was asleep beside the eggs when the ground trembled beneath him. At first he thought it was another volcanic tremor. The moon was unstable and small quakes were common. But this one was different. The hum of the eggs grew louder, almost urgent, vibrating through the cavern like a pulse that echoed in his chest. Aaron's eyes snapped open. A low, deep vibration filled the air, and a light brighter than the eggs' glow seeped through the cracks in the cavern walls. He scrambled to his feet, shielding the eggs with his body. Then he saw them, shapes moving outside the entrance, massive, graceful, and impossible. Adult dragons. Their scales shimmered like liquid metal, reflecting the red sky, and their eyes glowed like stars. Aaron froze. He had heard stories, old legends whispered in human colonies. Dragons that could traverse space, dragons that remembered entire civilizations, dragons that judged and destroyed those who were unworthy. He had never expected to see them, not in his lifetime, not on a dead volcanic moon. The dragons entered the cavern silently. No fire, no roar, only movement that seemed to bend the shadows themselves. Aaron backed against the wall, instinctively reaching for a piece of metal to defend himself. But the dragons did not attack. They circled the nest, their massive heads lowering, eyes studying him. He felt something strange, a weight pressing on his mind, but not like pain or fear. A presence, deep and old, reaching into his thoughts. Then he understood. They could see him. Not with eyes, but with memory, with something older and sharper than sight. They saw the council accusing him, the shuttle leaving him alone, the cold nights pressed against the eggs, sharing his warmth, whispering stories to creatures that could not yet hear. They saw the hours he spent repairing broken heat systems, the careful traps he had set against scavengers, the tears he had cried in silence. Every act of care, every sacrifice was clear to them. Aaron dropped the piece of metal, trembling. I didn't mean to. I only wanted to keep them alive," he whispered. His voice was small in the cavern, almost swallowed by the dragon's presence. One dragon leaned closer, its eye level with his head. Aaron felt the pull of its gaze in his chest, as if it were reaching into his soul. Memories of the outpost, of his exile, of every moment he had endured, unfolded in the air around him. He did not resist. There was no threat here, only understanding. He saw flashes of dragons long past, of civilizations that had risen and fallen, of moons and stars where dragons had once flown. And he saw something else, a memory of warmth, of care, of life given freely. His actions had left a mark on them, small but significant, a ripple in time. The dragon's silence was not empty. It was full of judgment, yes, but also of respect. They recognized the choice he had made, the courage in staying when he could have fled, the kindness he had shown to beings far beyond his own species. Aaron could feel their decision forming, slowly, in the space between him and them. He sank to his knees, overwhelmed. "I never wanted to be their hero. I just wanted them to survive," he said, voice breaking. His hands hovered over the eggs, protecting them instinctively. The dragons lowered their heads closer to him, and he felt the warmth of their gaze like sunlight. Then, slowly, one dragon pressed its head against his shoulder, a gesture so gentle it almost felt like a human touch. The cavern vibrated slightly as all of the adult dragons leaned closer, circling him and the eggs. They were massive, powerful, and yet careful, as if even their presence was a form of protection. Aaron felt his fear begin to fade, replaced by awe. "They see me," he whispered to the eggs. "They understand." The eggs pulsed brighter in response, as if acknowledging the dragon's presence and the bond forming between all of them. 4 hours, Aaron stayed there, kneeling beside the nest, surrounded by the dragons. He told them stories quietly, not because they needed words, but because speaking helped him feel part of something bigger. He spoke of humans, of mistakes and courage, of life and survival. The dragons listened in silence, their memories intertwining with his, creating a bridge across species and time. At last, the dragons withdrew slightly, their judgment clear. He was worthy. Not because of skill or strength, but because of heart. Aaron had shown what humans could be at their best, not in war or conquest, but in care, in perseverance, in warmth pressed against cold stone to protect life. Aaron exhaled, exhausted but relieved. He pressed his hands against the eggs again, and for the first time, he felt them stir with a stronger, more certain life. He smiled, tears streaking his face. "They'll grow strong," he whispered. "And you'll remember me." One dragon, the largest of all, bent its head near him, and Aaron felt a rush of connection, a silent promise. The dragon did not speak, but he understood. They would watch over him as he had watched over the eggs. They would not forget. In return, he would continue to protect the young, no matter the storms or enemies that might come. The silence stretched, filled with understanding rather than words. Aaron felt the weight of history pressing down but also lifting him. The dragon's presence was not just power, it was trust, acknowledgement and recognition of humanity's potential. Night fell over the volcanic moon, and the cavern glowed softly with the egg's light and the shimmering scales of the adult dragons. Aaron settled beside the nest once more, feeling their warmth surround him. He was no longer alone. The dragons had judged him, and in that judgment, they had given him something humanity often failed to give: respect. For the first time since exile, Aaron felt complete. The eggs were safe, the dragons aware and watchful, and he had earned his place in a story far larger than himself. Alone on a forgotten moon, he was part of something eternal. And he knew that whatever came next, he would not falter. The dragons had seen his heart. They would remember him. And he would protect the life that had been entrusted to him, come fire, storm, or shadow. Aaron Holt, once cast out and forgotten, now knelt among legends, and for the first time he felt truly alive. The cavern was quiet now, but the stillness was different from the silence that had filled it before. This was a silence full of purpose, full of understanding. The adult dragons, massive and shining, circled the nest where the eggs had begun to crack, revealing tiny wet hatchlings blinking into the dim light. Aaron Holt knelt beside them, exhausted but alert, his hands hovering protectively over the new life. The largest dragon, its scales like molten metal, lowered its head to his level. Aaron felt the weight of its gaze, not threatening, not distant, but full of attention. Then he sensed something strange, a voice not spoken but carried directly into his mind. It was deep and resonant, layered with many tones as if more than one dragon was speaking at once. "Human," the voice said. "You have guarded life when all else would abandon it. You have pressed warmth against cold stone. You have chosen care when you could have fled. We remember." Aaron swallowed hard, feeling awe and fear mixed together. I only did what I could," he whispered. "I only wanted them to live." The dragon's reply was calm, deliberate, and absolute. "Your choice carries meaning. All who abandon their own will are unworthy of trust. But those who protect the helpless, those we will never forget. You are the first among your kind we have seen with such purpose." Aaron's chest tightened. He had spent months alone on this dead moon, cast out by humans who had called him weak, abandoned by a civilization that forgot him. And now, beings older than planets themselves were telling him that he had done something important, that he had mattered. He pressed his hands to his face, blinking back tears, and looked at the tiny dragons, their scales still damp and soft. "They will grow," he said softly. "And they will remember me too." The dragons lowered their massive heads, almost touching the hatchlings with their snouts, and Aaron felt a rush of heat and energy fill the cavern. The young dragons pulsed with a faint glow, their tiny wings stretching instinctively. Aaron realized that the dragon's memory and will had not only recognized his efforts, but had begun to teach the hatchlings instinctively what he had shown them: warmth, protection, and care. "You have shown a way we had not expected," the dragon's voice continued. "A species that values courage, kindness, and the defense of life can be trusted. They may yet grow to be worthy allies in the future. Remember this, human, your choices ripple beyond this moon, beyond your own kind. Life remembers those who act with care." Aaron's mind raced. He thought of the outpost, of the council that had exiled him, of the scavengers who had tried to take the eggs. All of it had led to this moment. He had no army, no rank, no authority, only determination and the willingness to act. And yet, here he was, standing among legends, shaping the memory of creatures that could span galaxies. He pressed himself closer to the hatchlings, feeling their fragile bodies against his hands. One opened its tiny mouth and made a small, curious chirp. Another blinked slowly at him, wings fluttering. Aaron laughed softly. "You're safe now," he said. "You will grow strong and the world will see what you are. But only because we chose to care." Outside, the volcanic storms of the moon continued, but inside the cavern, the light from the hatchlings and the shimmering adult dragons pushed back the darkness. Aaron worked carefully, feeding the young ones small bits of warmed liquid from containers he had prepared. Each hatchling responded instinctively, following his movements, feeling his warmth, trusting him as he had trusted them for so long. "You carry the hope of your kind," the dragons continued in their shared mind voice, "and the hope of all who protect life. Remember this, no species that abandons its will can be trusted. But those who choose to protect the helpless, their deeds echo across time and space. They are remembered." Aaron nodded, tears flowing freely now. He understood. The dragons were not simply recognizing him, they were declaring a pact, a principle that would shape the future of interstellar life. Humanity, small and scattered as it was, could be remembered for its courage, for its choices, for the protection it could offer to life weaker than itself. And Aaron, once cast out, was the first to prove that humans could reach that standard. For the first time in months, he allowed himself to feel hope for more than survival. He imagined the hatchlings growing, learning, flying across the stars. He imagined human colonies far away and how, if they ever encountered dragons, they might find not enemies but allies, if they chose to act with care. Days passed and Aaron remained with the dragons and their young. He built small perches and shelters within the cavern, reinforced walls, and taught himself to understand the subtle movements and vibrations of the hatchlings. He discovered that the dragons responded to warmth, to gentle sound, and to patience. Every moment spent with them reinforced what the dragons had said, that care mattered more than power, that protection mattered more than conquest. He began to speak to the young dragons, softly, explaining the world he had come from, the humans he had left behind, and the mistakes and courage he had witnessed in his own species. The hatchlings chirped and pulsed, absorbing his presence, learning the rhythms of trust and care. Aaron felt a connection to life that went far beyond survival. One evening, as the red light of the distant star filtered through the cavern, the adult dragons gathered above him and the hatchlings. Their massive bodies blocked the weak sunlight, casting shimmering reflections across the cavern walls. Aaron stood in awe as they pulsed their energy in a silent display. He felt their decision: humanity at its best could be trusted. Life that chooses to protect would not be forgotten. Aaron looked at the hatchlings and whispered, "This is just the beginning. We will be remembered together." He pressed his hands against the eggs that still had tiny cracks, finishing their hatching gently, and the young dragons pressed against him instinctively. For the first time he knew that exile had not been the end. It had been the start of something larger, a bridge between humans and dragons, a pact that would endure, a lesson for the stars. His life, small and forgotten once, had rippled outward to shape the memory of beings older and wiser than planets. And so, on a dead volcanic moon at the edge of known space, Aaron Holt, cast out, forgotten and yet unbroken, stood among dragons. The young pulsed and chirped, the adults shimmered with ancient power, and the words of the pact echoed in his mind. Any species that abandons its own will never be trusted, but any who protect the helpless will never be forgotten. Aaron smiled, pressing a hand against a hatchling's tiny head. "We will not be forgotten," he said softly. "And I will never stop protecting you." In that moment, the volcanic moon, harsh and lifeless to the careless eye, became a beacon. Life, courage and kindness had triumphed. The story of a single human who chose to care, and the dragons who would never forget, began to echo across the stars.